Then we like joy span. This idea of like, what's your why? Like, you got to have some fun. Like, what's the point of living to 100 if, you're not hanging out with your friends and being joyful and like getting to the why of your wellness? Like, what is it do you really want that doesn't require maybe sometimes it does require a complete 180, but like, what are the things you want to be doing? We are all in for a treat because in celebration of the book that Colleen and I wrote, which if you're on YouTube, you can see, called The Joy of Well-Being, a practical guide to a happy, healthy, and long life, which is officially out today in the world at every bookseller and on Amazon, of course. You can find out more at thejoyofwellbeing.com. But in celebration of the book, we are having our dear friend, the incredibly credentialed, talented, and lovely human, Dr. Sara Gottfried, interview us as guest host. We haven't done this before, and we're just so excited to have Sara on the show with us and, turn it around and ask us questions. So this is going to be a fun one. Sara, so good to see you, and thanks so much for doing this.
My absolute pleasure. I love this book. I just want to shout it from the rooftops because this is groundbreaking, and I'm so excited that we get to get into the details. And so I feel like our listeners, our viewers already know about your bios, but I wonder what's one weird or quirky or a something that maybe they don't know about the two of you.
So the big one for me is in the last chapter of the book. And it has to do with our fertility struggles. And this is something we haven't shared publicly. And that's the role I played in this. And we think it's important because 40% of fertility issues are us guys, the men, and not the women. And that was the case in our life. And this was like a really humbling, terrifying, drop down on your knees, praying to God or praying to whatever you believe in moment for us. And, in our fertility struggle, we discovered that the issue was me. And more specifically, there was no sperm. I had no sperm. And it could be something. It could have been something that I was born with, where I officially didn't produce sperm at all, or it could have been something called, azoospermia, and that there was some obstruction. And there were, in this process, I did a whole battery of tests, and usually with obstruction, there's like one place where it's common, where you go to a doctor's office, you kind of, he kind of goes in there very far. And I didn't have that. And that was the most common. So I was really concerned that we weren't going to be able to have a biological child. And there was hope of a procedure where they literally, go in and cut your testicle open to search for sperm. And the odds actually weren't in our favor because I didn't have the obstruction in like the most common place. And it was a really tough experience. It was one that really challenged a lot of our beliefs, one of which is we definitely believe in having a strong connection with the doctor and that being powerful. And I'll never forget, we went in on like a Saturday morning. This was a specialist who flew in from St. Louis every month to do this procedure. And we sit down and it's 8 a.m. He's already like drinking his diet Pepsi. I don't even know if it was diet. Like he's drinking his soda. And I'm just like, oh God, this isn't going to be a fit. And he starts saying how, I really hope this works because adopting is just terrible. And the kids have all these problems. And this is like against everything we believe. Like kids have all these problems and, you just don't want to go down that path. This is really the only one. And I'm just like, I'm not liking anything I'm hearing. And the fact, drinking soda at 8 a.m. in front of me is not something that we necessarily believe in. So I'm like really struggling, like connecting to this guy, let alone in like a minute, he's going to like cut me open. But this was it. Like this was the person who did the procedure. And so we went with it. And sure enough, it was successful in the gold rush and 12 vials of sperm later, but there were also a number of miscarriages that Colleen suffered through. But that was one thing that I haven't really shared at all, but was important due to the fact that there is a fertility crisis and 40% of men are the problem. And it's something that was important to us.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this vulnerability. I really feel like I'm learning how vulnerability is everything. It's the key to transformation. It's the key to connection. I imagine that it brought the two of you closer together. And it's, and it's also, I mean, you've had many brushes with the medical system. We're going to talk a bit about that and how it led to writing this book over the last 14 years. And I can just visualize that doctor flying in from St. Louis with the Diet Pepsi or the Pepsi, because I think half of my colleagues in conventional medicine drink soda. Drink soda. Like, how is that possible?
And we explored everything. I remember going to holistic healers and acupuncturists, intuitives, and I got some, it's all the castor oil, just castor oil down there and you're good. And we tried everything.
Lots of castor oil.
Lots of castor oil. I'm like, I don't even want to see it again. And this was an instance where, Western prevailed. And to this date, there's no good medical answer. And I remember going back years later after successfully having 2 biological children and going to another doctor and saying, like, doing the test again to see if, sperm was coming out. And the answer was no. Because to me, part of me is like, I want to know what's going on here. Was it a parasite? Was it something? I like connecting the dots. And the doctor was like, why do you care?
Get over it.
Like, you have 2 kids. You know what? I was like, he's right. Sometimes you just have to put things in the I don't know, and that's okay.
Is that your learning? Because I feel like when we have an experience like this, and I'll just back up just so we can generalize. So with infertility, the old teaching, this is what I learned 30 years ago, is that 40% of the time with infertility, it's the woman, 40% of the time it's the man, 20% of the time you don't know, or it's both. So I always think of these symptoms and conditions, like azospermia in your situation, as divine messages of some sort of teaching. And I'm curious what your teaching was. Maybe it was the I don't know.
I think that's it, because I'm still very much about connecting the dots. And a big part of me and my core belief is it's all connected. And that there's always a message, whether it's a deeper spiritual message or there's something gut related or brain or psychosomatic, there's always kind of something. And I also have had other experiences where sometimes there just is no good answer and you kind of have to let go. And that is sometimes hard for me. I tend to go like, let's do the testing. I do all the vials of blood. I just did my Genova stool test, which I know I've heard you talk about. And sometimes there's just,
I think we learned a ton about the resilience of the human spirit through this whole ordeal and what we were able to endure as a couple and as individuals, because it is one of those moments that can break you or can bring you closer together. And luckily it brought us closer together.
Yeah.
Well, resilience is such a through line in your new book. And before we move on to some questions that are specific to your book, Colleen, do you want to add anything in terms of something that people don't know about you? You have a few big reveals in this book.
Unless you're a super early OG mindbodygreen community member, I had a near-catastrophic pulmonary embolism in 2012, which was really the inflection point that helped me dive full into this world of well-being. And my why has evolved so much over the decades, over the years of life. But I was early 30s, working hard in New York City, apply all applicable stereotypes, went to lots of boutique fitness classes, ate, drank, had a lot of fun, and looked seemingly healthy on the outside. I think I was really struggling to figure out my purpose. I was working in a role. I remember, if I told people I worked at Walmart in New York City at that era, I would get cringe, distorted faces. How do you do that? So I had, really conflicted views about, what I was doing with my life and the direction of it. But I looked okay. And one day I was leaving Tara Stiles' Strala yoga class, 11 a.m., did it every weekend. And Jason met me in the city in West Village because I was like, I'm having some trouble breathing. And we walked around a little bit and I was like, I think I just need to go home. And it was one of those glorious New York City days. We always say if we were to go back to New York City, maybe we would just live there in the month of May because it's such a great time to be in New York. And we left the subway station, and it's a station that has particularly steep stairs, and I collapsed walking up the stairs and got out of the subway station. And I did what I think a lot of women and some men unfortunately do themselves. I gaslit all my symptoms. I was like, I'm dehydrated. I also don't want to go to the NYU ER on a Saturday, but I was like, I'm fine. Called my doctor, was able to talk him out of anything, and then was lethargic and napped the entire rest of the weekend. And I knew something was wrong. There were voices, there were symptoms. I was just not listening to them. And Jason said, if you go into work on Monday, the only way I will let you go is if you stop by your doctor on the way there. So took the train to Soho where my doctor was. And, within a few minutes, he's like, you're having a pulmonary embolism. We need to get you to the NYU. And I'm like, I don't know what a pulmonary embolism is. I was so bewildered. He gave me this little sign that said, I'm having a pulmonary embolism. It was unclear to me if he was concerned about me being able to get to the NYU ER or if he was concerned I would waste valuable time not being able to communicate what was wrong once I got there. But I ended up having showers of clots in my lungs. And it was, one of those cosmic kick in the butt moments where you're like, oh, wow, this life is not aligning with my values, with my body, and is not going to be sustainable. And, my biggest kind of learning and wish from all this is that I had listened to those little whispers and that I didn't have to wait for this huge assault from the universe to change my life. And that was the start of a really long healing process. I did write an article on mindbodygreen that went viral. And, a lot of women reached out about, their sisters, their mothers, their daughters who had serious events on birth control as well, many of them being catastrophic. So I had heard about the side effects, but I think dismissed them because I wasn't a smoker, because I wasn't overweight. I didn't actually have a lot of the predisposition markers for clotting. So it was somewhat of an interesting case, but it did start me on this journey of looking at everything from Western, all the tests someone's going to do when a 32-year-old has a pulmonary embolism, to really exploring parts that were less familiar to me, the holistic side, healers. And I saw the good, I saw the bad, I saw it all on this journey. And, the joy of well-being is really the roadmap I wish I had back then when I was trying to live a life that better aligned with my values, that brought me more joy, and just a faster kind of way of really focusing on the fundamentals, because that is going to have the most impact on your health and well-being.
So profound. As a physician, pulmonary embolus is the most feared diagnosis that we face. And it's the thing that kills young men and women. It sounds like you were on the birth control pill. Is that right?
It was 10 years.
10 years. So, yeah, separately, we can talk about the birth control pill and how that's like the greatest endocrinopathy of American women. But I don't want to get sidetracked or on my soapbox.
I look forward to that conversation with you.
Sounds good. So this misalignment really came into sharp relief for you. And I feel like what we're doing now is we're reverse engineering the question that you begin the book with, which is, I want to make sure I get it right. How do you know when it's time to change your life? So you ask that question in the introduction. And some could see it as a rhetorical question, but you actually mean it. So tell us what is it that you hope your readers, your viewers, your listeners, what do you want them to do with that question?
I think it's a couple things. One is don't wait for that kick in the butt, almost catastrophic event, or that time you walk in to see your physician and they say, we've got a serious problem. Don't wait for that is one. And the other is you don't necessarily need to do a life overhaul where you quit your job and move to Bali tomorrow. That's just not realistic.
I just made reservations to go to Bali. I love Bali. I don't have to go to Bali. I could do it here in Northern California.
I'm like, look, if you love Bali,
Go to
go to
Bali.
Bali, knock yourself out. But I think there are in our world often lofty expectations that go along with living this way. And on one side of it, and that could mean various things, whether that means going to Bali or going all in on some of the holistic treatments and the jade eggs and the toys and what we like to refer as but the frosting, so to speak. Like, we still think it's important. Our friend mutual JJ Virgin said to us, it sounds like you got to bake the cake like before you put on the frosting, and there seems to be like a lot of frosting out there. And then on the biohacking side, it's the protocols and the and these intense workouts, and they're often a recipe to, we say, if I were to do all these protocols, like, this is a recipe to divorce. Like, if I'm going to wake up and get my way, then I do my hot cold, and then I do my VO2 max and measuring the labs. Like, wow, like, this is great. We'll get divorced. My kids will kill me. And so, for us, it's like, you don't necessarily to need to go that far. And it's like, getting back to your question, it's just really important to like ask yourself some basic questions, like with intentionality. Like, that's a big word for Colleen and I. Like, your intentions in life, like, what's your why? We tend to think of the conversation around longevity in a couple ways. One, like the 1.0 was, I want to live a very long life to 100. Then that segued to the 2.0 health span. Well, I want to live to 100, but I want to be healthy, mobile, and active for 99 years, 11 months, and 30 days before I rapidly decline over 24 hours. Then we like joy span. This idea of like, what's your why? Like, you got to have some fun. Like, what's the point of living to 100 if you're not hanging out with your friends and being joyful, and like getting to the why of your wellness? Like, what is it do you really want that doesn't require a complete, maybe sometimes it does require a complete 180, but like, what are the things you want to be doing?
Yeah, and how do you, if you're not having one of these edge case scenarios that I had or Jason had in his life, which I hope people don't, how do you get to a place of looking really critically and really intentionally and thinking about the type of life that you want to cultivate, and not the one that you may see out there, but the one that will really bring you joy? And when you ask someone what brings you joy, for a lot of people that can be a hard question. But the type of well-lived life that we imagine does involve lots of experiences of joy and hopefully a lot of happiness and health along the way.
So like, don't wait for that moment. Start to ask your questions, like, why do you get out of bed in the morning? What type of life do you want to live in 20, 30, 50 years from now? What does that look like? How active do you want to be? For me specifically, I'm 48. My father died of heart disease at 47. My two grandfathers died at age 44 from cancer. The other one, 49, heart disease. Men in my family have a terrible track record with longevity, but like, I believe that stops with me. I believe in epigenetics. I believe we have the power to turn on and off genes. And yes, I'm very fortunate to work with great doctors and do all sorts of testing. I'm good. I'm not worried. But my why is, I want to be around. I've got young kids and I want to be active. I want to be able to, if our daughters are 6 and almost 4, the idea of grandchildren, if they choose to have children, is amazing. And by the time they have them, I'm going to be, up there, and I want to be able to pick up a 30-pounder. So like, it segues to my why with like resistance training and leg strength, because that's something that, starts to rapidly decline as we age. And so we just want everyone to start like really asking the questions, like, why are you doing all this wellness? What's your
What is the point of all these smoothies?
What's the point of all these smoothies? I love it. On page 7, you talk about the spectrum. You talk about the Kardashian level wellness, filled with lymphatic drainage treatments, expensive vegan meal delivery, workouts for perkier posterior. We're going to circle back to that in a moment. And then at the other extreme is the folks who are measuring their lactate after workouts and calculating their VO2 max, and they're wearing a continuous glucose monitor. These people offer great scientific insight, but at the same time, they're bringing a technical intensity and rigidity to exercise and eating that sucks the fun right out of it. I read that and I was like, I'm taking off this CGM.
And we do love CGMs. We think they're extraordinarily informative, and there's so much so much information, but maybe not wear one forever.
Yeah, and I think the passage that you're getting at is that we have a really complicated relationship with the word wellness as it's currently reflected in society, and we look at this vast ecosystem of social media and the way we see normal people interacting with wellness, and it doesn't resonate with us at all personally. And I think we've gotten so off track with the frosting, and we're not spending enough time on the fundamentals that actually are accessible. It's actually the stuff we can all agree on, and done in the right way, hopefully brings you joy. And as a mother of two and running a company, I look at wellness out there and I'm like, I can't do that.
Yes.
And this is my job.
Yeah.
So how do we reset and reawaken what the word means so that it's actually something that people can integrate into their lives and not something else they have to do?
And for two people, this is our work on our life, and we're so passionate about this, but we struggled with a lot of this. And so how does someone who's got a demanding job or a partner and kids, and it's just overwhelming and impossible, and felt like in one regard that the advancement in this conversation is just remarkable. Like I go back to like 2009 when we launched, and today, like, remarkable how far we've come in this conversation, and like the science and your work and all, like there are just so many people advancing this. But it's a double-edged sword, because so much of it points to these modalities, practices, and protocols they're just so inaccessible. But to us, it was just so clear. There's so much pointing to practices that don't require a lot of time or money. And that's always the objection with health and wellness. I don't have the time. I don't have the resources. And we said, you know what? There's actually so much here where we feel comfortable with saying, no, you can do it, and we can get you 80% there. And if you want to dial it up, get the extra 20%, you're going to have to invest more time and resources. But we feel really good about this. And that's exciting and important. And given the state of media right now, where there's so much information, but there's also so much contradiction, and it's difficult to navigate.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I feel like we're gonna build over the course of this podcast to your mission statement. So I really want to hear your mission statements, and you guide the reader towards the end where they're creating a mission statement for their life. And I imagine it maps to the why in some important way. So my why, by the way, is similar to you, Jason. I want to be at my grandchildren's, maybe great-grandchildren's weddings, should my progeny choose to have kids. And I want to be able to twerk, because twerking is really a diagnostic test of the low back. I mean, you could look at it that way, right? Like if you can't twerk, if you're too stiff, like there's some mobility problem that needs to be addressed. And I want to have some like chocolate fudge frosting, because it's delicious. Yes, you have to bake the cake first, but frosting is delicious. So coming back to this idea of resilience and this objection of time and money, one of the things that's free is connection. And the two of you have such a profound connection. I want to just ask a simple question, which is, how did you decide to write this book together? I mean, obviously there's so much, there's this palpable synergy between the two of you, but I just want to get really explicit about how you decided to do this.
You know, I think we've seen a lot in our space, and the subject of writing a book together has come up numerous times over the past couple of years. And after I wrote my book, like I wrote it like 8 years ago, because it takes a while to come out. I was like, I'm done. Not going to do this. But we started to feel like the conversation was becoming uh, very inaccessible and very overwhelming. And we felt that this was the best format to kind of like be the source of truth, if you will, for all of the conversations out there. And I think if you look at Colleen and I, like what we're good at, like we're not an MD, we're not a PhD, we don't have any credentials. I think at our core is we're good curators. We sniff out BS pretty well. Uh, I think I think we're pretty good at understanding if this is a fad or this is a trend. This has legs. This has science. This is fluff. And it has been, I do want to like such a joy to see like the conversation around longevity advance. But we started to just get a lot of questions anecdotally from people. Well, should I do this and do that? And we started to like scratch our heads like this is just overwhelming. And it became overwhelming for us. And I'm wearing a Whoop and an Aura ring and we have an 8-sleep mattress. And we've done levels, GCG, we've done it all. And so we just kind of felt like, you know what, we can do this. And we kind of felt like it was incumbent upon us to do it. Like the one thing that people have described mindbodygreen throughout the years, which, it means a lot to us, is like kind of like the United Nations of wellness. It's like we're kind of neutral to some degree. We try to be balanced. We try to advance the conversation, all different points of view, as long as like they're not crazy, are welcome, because we think that's part of the conversation. And we increasingly felt like we lived in a world that rewarded extreme points of view, that were highly polarized. We can talk more about that. And that we're pretty balanced. And we felt like the format to be balanced, and like, we share a mutual book agent. Celeste played a big role in also like encouraging us to do the book. So I have to give her credit, Park and Fine, is like, we're like sort of incredibly reasonable people. And if you're like a very reasonable person, social media is not the place for you or the internet. But like a book is a place where being reasonable and balanced, that's where you kind of want to be.
Yeah, and we want to reset the conversation on wellness and well-being. Like these practices have literally saved our lives. And the conversation has gotten, unfortunately, extraordinarily off track. So how do we reset the conversation and focus on the things that are going to move the needle?
Love it. I'm listening for the tribal language of this book. I've got joy span, the UN of wellness, and you also write about doc stars. And I was asking you before we hit record, wait, am I a doc star? So can you explain like what's a doc star? I think part of what we're talking about on social media is doc stars.
Well, you definitely are a doc star.
In the positive way.
In the best way.
Yeah.
But I think in the age of social media, it's valuable to have a very strong personal brand to get your message out, to sell products, to be heard in a cacophony of voices. And unfortunately, the way the algorithms work, they reward extremism. And there's a data point in the book we reference where Wharton at the University of Pennsylvania did a study analyzing the most emailed list of the New York Times. Essentially, these are like the most widely read articles in the world. It's the New York Times. It's like the list you want to be on. And they looked at the articles and characterized them by emotion. And the top 3 emotions were anxiety, awe, and anger. And anger was number 1. Anger increased virality by 34%. And to translate this for listeners and our viewers, essentially an article was more likely to be read, shared, or if it's a video, watched, engaged with, commented, if someone engaged with that piece and was angry. So, and I don't think this is unique to the New York Times. I think this is a cultural phenomenon, and probably and more so in social media. So we're in a system where if you want to get your message out, the best way to do so is to incite anger, having an extreme point of view. And that we see it in politics every day, unfortunately, and we see it in our space. And that's just not something we fundamentally believe in.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, there's time and a place for some righteous anger that is related to people getting failed by the medical system, but I don't think that's what we're talking about here with the New York Times.
I think we're talking about like, okay, let's pick a food. If I were to, we've joked, if we were to build a personal brand right now on social media, let's pick a point of view. Let's go all in, all or nothing, and let's pick a food and let's demonize it, and let's not deviate. And maybe pick an enemy. Let's go after spinach. Even though I will say it's high in oxalates, so you got to be careful of kidney stones. But like, spinach is terrible. We're eating too much spinach. We need to go all in on broccoli, the broccoli only diet. And if you talk to me about why broccoli is not good or why spinach is great, I'm going to try to cancel you. And broccoli, and I'm going to, broccoli and nothing else. And that's just not balanced and really unfortunate, but that's the way to attract attention.
It's so true. It's so true. So I want to talk a bit about what has changed personally for the two of you over the past 14 years. And I especially want to look at maybe the last couple of years as you were writing this book together. What have you maybe found has dropped away in terms of practices or attitudes or the way that you live your life? And what have you really doubled down on or even tripled down on? So I'd love to position that for both of you.
So as you know, we moved within the past year from being in Brooklyn for 13 years to the city of Miami. And you brought up this idea of connection. And connection for us is, one of our favorite pillars in this book, and probably one of the most underrated things that people aren't talking enough about right now in health and wellness. There's a Cigna study that we quote in the book from 2019 that said only around half of Americans are having meaningful daily face-to-face interactions. And since that study was in 2019, it's really scary to think of what that is right now in 2023. We know that, exercise can lower your mortality rate by 20%. Having a good diet is more or less the same at 30%. But relationships, having friends, and being connected to your community can lower your mortality risk by 45%. So connection is something that we think a lot about, especially with our move to Miami. I think in New York, we were a little bit on autopilot. We didn't really think about, okay, what was our role in terms of being intentional about creating a community of people, then, being a really good friend, and what does that mean in terms of checking in on people so that you have that group of friends that you can call at, when shit hits the fan and you really need support. There is such a loneliness epidemic right now. We found that there's a study that loneliness has the same impact as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So in moving here, we weren't just moving to Miami. We were intentionally creating a community that will be our community for at least the next 15 years while our children finish out school, but hopefully longer. And I found that as a human, I've had to totally rewire how I interact with people. I go back to that kind of stage in life where you're aggressively reaching out to people, doing things that make you uncomfortable, being the first woman to text when you're making friends with another woman, following up on ways that, frankly, I was kind of asleep at the wheel on. And now there's so much data around meaningful connection that, it's something I prioritize in a way that I didn't do for 14 years. We both had a really similar transition, and I'll start and then probably let you finish it. In terms of two key areas being exercise modalities and food. And being in New York in the 2010s was like a cornucopia of wellness fantasy. If there was a yoga class you wanted to take, you could do it. If there was a boutique fitness class, cycling in a pool, they had it. It was such a fun and exciting, thriving time to experiment in wellness. And one of the things that, one of the key modalities was yoga. And Pilates was also, really having a moment and still continues to. but the eating habits and nutrition trends tend to follow the exercise modality trends. So there was a lot of vegan, vegetarian cuisine of the moment, Suen, pure food and wine. And, the statistic that helped me as I envisioned my future life and my mission statement that really shook my framework. And I know you've heard it. If you're over 65, there's a 25% chance that you'll fall. And if you do fall, studies show that your chances of falling again double. And if you fall and break your hip, then there's a 30 to 40% chance that you will die within a year, not necessarily from the fall, but from everything else that happens. And I had heard that statistic, and that was my whoa inflection moment. I think I then heard it on so many different podcasts. I became a little immune to it, that when we posted it on mindbodygreen, it was a wildfire of emotions of people a little upset that we had ruined their fun Friday morning. But, that was the study that really changed how I exercised, again, with this longer term vision of protecting and building my body for the type of body that could play with my grandchildren. And, I hope to twerk too. That's such a lofty goal. I'll let you speak to the nutrition piece.
And I think Colleen and I both had the similar changes with regards to exercise, nutrition, and then community. And just on the nutrition piece, I was in the same place. I tried everything. I leaned, definitely planned forward. And that's evolved for me in my quest to put on lean muscle mass. I kind of had this like funny aha moment where I didn't weigh myself a lot. And then I got on the scale and I noticed I had lost like 7 or 8 pounds. But I like everything felt the same. So I'm like, what's going on here? Everything okay? And then I noticed in the mirror that my ass was flattening. I'm like, oh my God, I'm developing old white man's ass. And okay, this totally makes sense because I never liked doing resistance training for my legs. So I think the last time I did that was right before my last basketball game 25 years ago. Okay, this makes sense. Maybe I need to like start doing this, not for, we do live in Miami, not for the aesthetics, but just like more generally, like I need to focus on my legs again. And so resistance training became a priority because, I was yoga saved my life in many regards. And I got all in on yoga and I would do a little resistance training, but never legs. And that became a focus for me. And so it really started from like a place where it was yoga all the time and a little resistance training to now a focus on resistance training and then a little yoga. And as you know, it's harder to gain lean muscle mass as you age. It's a lot easier when you're younger. And I'm 48. So I'm like, okay, I have like a race against the clock here. And the way to do so is you also need to ingest enough protein to specifically with the right amino acid profile and then specifically leucine in order to promote muscle protein synthesis. And the RDA is just completely inefficient of the point. I always like grams. I don't like kilograms. The 0.36 grams per pound of body weight, that's for people to survive and not thrive. And most experts believe probably need to double or triple that if you're serious about putting on lean muscle mass. And more specifically, you have to make sure you get enough leucine because if you don't get the 2.5 to 3 grams, the protein just kind of doesn't count. And I don't think I want to consume protein for the sake, like I want it to count towards building muscle. And so you have to start looking at amino acid profile. And so that, fortunately, unfortunately, you have to probably eat some more animal-based foods or protein powders because it's just a lot more difficult to do. I'm not saying it's impossible, but a lot more difficult to do in a plant-based diet. So that became a real focus for me as I was serious about building muscles. And a couple months later, I've regained 5 pounds of lean muscle mass and I'm trying to get another 5 more. But that's been a big shift for us. And again, it wasn't about the vanity. It's about like, go back to this moment of the statistic of the fall. And again, I want to reiterate because someone's probably going to say it's not the fall and they're going to try to cancel us. It's everything that goes wrong. It's, maybe it is the fall, but it could be the complications from surgery or the infection or the depression after being immobile. Like, and anecdotally, we've actually seen this happen to a lot of friends and family members, unfortunately. And so what do you want to happen? One, you want the balance and the mobility so you don't fall. Two, you want the mobility and the strength where maybe you're about to fall and you can grab something so you don't fall. Or three, you want the armor and the muscle so you break the fall. Or if you are hung up in a hospital bed for weeks, where if anyone who's had that unfortunate experience, you lose weight rapidly. You want that muscle to be there. So if you start to lose weight, you've got the muscle, you've got like the good stuff there. And so that's the why for us. That's so critical. So that's like a big one. That why we want that lean muscle mass, and that's been a huge shift. And then to build off of what Colleen said with community, that's an area, within the wellness world, we have such like a tremendous community. But something I've had to work on is I've lost touch with so many of my friends. And I remember, playing basketball at Columbia. I had like such a great group of friends, and everyone hung around New York, and we went out all the time. We had so much fun. But then, work, kids, and guy, I don't think I'm unique here, and that guys are not as good as our female counterparts in keeping in touch. And I lost touch with a lot of friends, and it's something I'm working on, and I regret. And in this process, in coming out on the other side of the pandemic, I think we've all realized how critical that is. And I think in the context of our world, look, nutrition and exercise are paramount. Like, I'm all about diet, I am all about exercise, but I think you can easily ignore emotional well-being. I think you got to ask yourself some harder questions. And sometimes that is the magic of what's going wrong in our health. And in the process of writing the book, I came across like my all-time favorite study, the Rosetto study, which is like the study I need to like tell myself all the time whenever I get a little too crazy about like something I'm trying to do with my diet. And the Rosetto study is essentially, Rosetto was a small town in rural Pennsylvania in the 1950s. And this is when heart disease enters America, but not in Rosetto. Heart attacks were half the rate of the nation of those under 65, and men under 55, no heart attacks, like non-existent. And so they're like, what's going on in Rosetto? What are these people doing? Well, they're smoking, they're drinking, they're eating lots of pasta and meatballs. Like, this makes no sense. And so they dig a little deeper, and these people had incredibly strong social connections. Multi-generational living was paramount. They were celebrating parties and parades, enjoying wine and food with family and friends. And then the 1960s happens, and the community starts to break up. People move away, and guess what? Heart disease arrives. And so for me, the takeaway there is, you just cannot underestimate the magic of IRL social connection that's meaningful. And that's something that just like can't be emphasized enough in our world. And I think it's harder for people to go there because sometimes it does put you in an uncomfortable place. It's a lot easier to say like, eat more vegetables, go work out more. But then you have to ask like, okay, maybe I don't have anyone to call in the middle of the night if I'm in a crisis. Maybe that's a problem. Maybe it's me. That's a lot harder.
So we know that with aging, there's this distinction that we have, like in our 20s as teenagers, maybe even in our 30s and 40s, between the thigh and the ass. And then they start to meld together in both men and women and become a thas. So my daughters, who like to, point out some of the things I need to work on, have told me that I have a thas now. And so I'm just curious, Jason, have you, like, is the thas gone?
It's getting a lot better, and again, like, I was a basketball player, so like basketball player, like strong legs, I had like this, basketball butt, and that I don't know if the basketball butt is ever fully coming back in full Miami form.
High bar.
A very high bar for butt.
Yeah.
But it's starting to like get some muscle again, because it was just like, whoa, God, I'm like, what happened here?
Well, your kids are at an age where they're not going to point this out to you, kindly or unkindly. So I want to circle back to this connection point, because Colleen, you went to Stanford, Jason, you went to Columbia. Like, I remember that's where isolation really started for me. Kind of that achievement, the hamster wheel, the get the highest grades, go to the best medical school, like this whole process of isolation without a lot of mindfulness about the social connection that really, in my mind, is kind of the purpose of life. Like, I really believe that love and connection is the purpose. So how do you undo that? How do you speak to, some of the 20 somethings or the 30 somethings who are out there who are, they're on their career ascent and they're like, yeah, connection. That's something I can do on the weekends. Or, as you said, Colleen, that taking that first uncomfortable step and like developing that relationship with someone that you just met and texting for the first time, like taking those steps, how do you reach that person? And I think the Rosetta story is a great one. Anything else you could share that would really get people to do that, like starting today?
Well, I think that the big objection people have is the social anxiety about trying to reconnect with someone. What are they gonna? And look, I grew up with like a telephone where you actually had to physically pick up a phone, and someone would have to answer, and you would hear the voice, and it would be like that uncommon that silence for a second, and you'd be miserable, and there'd be real anxiety. And the upside of technology and mobile phones is you can just text someone, and it's as simple as, "Hey, been thinking about you for X, Y, and Z reason. It's been too long. Just wanted to say hello. Miss our conversations or X or Y. Would love to reconnect." It's as simple as that. And we got this advice from Esther Perel, who I think is one of the best here on this subject. And what she said, and what I've found to be true, is you'll get a real sense right away in understanding if this person is open to connecting. And you're probably going to be surprised. And it's probably going to be a positive response. And if it isn't, that's okay. But that's like where, I think that's really special. You couldn't do that 20 years ago.
And if I was trying to connect with that person who I think I know pretty well from my early 20s and early 30s, it's about thinking long term, of going into the time machine and thinking of what do you want your life to look like in your 70s, in your 80s, in your 90s. Maybe you make it all the way to 100 when you're probably not working in your traditional sense. Do you envision yourself having friends over for tea? Do you envision yourself getting together with loved ones, seeing your kids growing up? If you want that type of flourishing life in your 70s, 80s, and 90s, you have to start making the investments now. You have to start thinking intentionally in that way. And I think also just getting back to the, kind of the principal question of the book is, what brings you joy? If you're unaware of where to find your so-called tribe, like that's a good place to start. What do you actually enjoy doing? And I remember a time in my life when I was working so much at work and kind of on an autopilot where I probably couldn't answer that question, which is probably one of the first signs that even if things look okay on the outside, that you may have some internal work to do. But when you get closer to the things that make your heart sing, to the activities you enjoy, whatever they may be, you're probably going to get closer to finding like-minded groups of people who can love and support you on life's journey through the ups and downs.
Beautiful. So beautiful. I was just getting a hit about, because I was a very similar person, Colleen, in my 20s and 30s. And I was just getting a hit about like when you are connected with other people and you're sharing your lung biome with them, like there's a way that it creates health. It changes your genetics. We know this from social genomics. It creates this upward benevolent cycle that is hard to measure, but it, as you said, with the statistics you gave about what you eat and the exercise that you do, and then the connections, what we know is that it is the most effective lever. And even if that's your reason for connecting with other people, like fine, like fabulous. Yeah. So we're going to get to the mission statements as I suggested earlier, but first I want to go back to a really important distinction you make in the book, and I want to make sure that we do this for our listeners, and that is the difference between wellness and well-being. So can you explain that to us?
Yeah. So when I think of wellness, I'm thinking of rigidity, perhaps protocols. I'm thinking of a lot of the frosting on the cake. I'm thinking of a focus on the self. And when I think of well-being, the biggest differentiator is this belief in something bigger. And that something bigger can be so broadly defined. If it's religion for you, fantastic. If it's spirituality, if it's nature, if it's caring for others, whatever it may be, but it's part of the toolkit that helps you live this well lived life.
I think it's coming from this place of service too. I think to some degree, and like, look, we're all self-serving, and you got to feel good about yourself before you have the ability to help someone else. But I think it really gets to the why, and the why and purpose also has a great benefit for you if you're listening. Like, there are countless studies in the benefits of serving others and being grateful and volunteering and so on. But well-being, this idea of service and purpose, being here and having goals and intentions that are much bigger than yourself, it's not only good for you and your health, for those who, tell me why this is good for me, but also good for your family, community, and the planet. And that's, I think we want to get the conversation back there to, deeper meaning and connection with other people and the planet we inhabit.
Beautiful. I love it. So on page 219, in the chapter on purpose, meaning, and service, you invite the reader to create a mission statement. And so I'm hoping that the two of you could share your mission statement.
One of our most important influences in that chapter is Lisa Miller, PhD, who's also a Miami resident.
When are you
And
moving, Sarah?
I'm wondering myself. I'm like, well, I need to go see what's happening with this fast situation. So might as well move to
How
Miami.
people are like, what? We need a great integrative doctor
we get
here,
that question a lot
and we
here.
get that question a lot. I think we have someone, so.
But we have both been fascinated by her research that shows that when mother and child are both high in spirituality, the child is 80% protected against oppression compared when they are not concordant for spirituality. So, in other words, a child was 5 times less likely to be depressed when spiritual life was shared with a mother. And I give that preview because, my why, which is my why of Mind Body Green, has changed so much over the decades, from someone who was, trying to solve their own edge case to now as a mother of 2 young girls. And I think it's hard to be a human. I think it's hard to be a boy, but I think it's extraordinarily challenging to be a girl right now. So, my mission right now is to raise well-adjusted girls to create joyful experiences into my life and to build a strong body and mind.
Yeah, I definitely share that mission and passion, because I do think that the mental health crisis is real, and unfortunately, I think we're in the early innings of that. And I also think more broadly, it's always been our goal and somewhat of our personal mission to kind of be the UN of wellness, to be that voice of reason, to be the place where different opinions are welcome. Uh, that seems almost like a contrarian view in our world, where you have multiple voices and multiple opinions, and it's a safe place where you may disagree, but you will find all the different views on diet and nutrition, and all the other fun subjects ripe for contention in our world. We want to be that place of reason, that safe place where people can go, where maybe they get a little bit of clarity, because it is so confusing. And look, I think we as a society, specifically here in America, aren't doing so well. And obesity, diabetes, every comorbidity, we're not really doing much better here, and we see a widening. And we do feel with this book that we have the opportunity, where there's so much great information that it's just not being shared in a way. And I get why someone looking in says, I don't have the time, I don't have the resources, because I look at the protocols and the gadgets and all the things, and I'm overwhelmed. And it is our mission to democratize some of this. And democratization doesn't mean we're dumbing it down. I get people's objections, because we have the same objections, and it's our mission to really help deliver. And I think, give people the tools and information so that they're informed to become their own CEO. In our words, they could make the best decisions for them, because it is hard out there and it is confusing, and we do have empathy. So, that's our why as well.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love what you two have curated. I love what you've written in this book. And I just want to remind our listeners to go to Amazon or wherever you get a book, pick this up. The Joy of Well-Being, a practical guide to a happy, healthy, long life. I want to finish with some final words. And I wonder if there's anything that we haven't covered today that is in the book that you really want to express here on your own podcast. So is there anything that we haven't covered that you really want to make sure is part of this recording?
I think we got a lot. I think we're going to have to do this again. You're really good, Sarah.
Yeah.
Well, you guys are easy. You guys are easy and fun.
I think the hardest part of this journey is taking the steps to listen to your own body so that you do have the confidence to become the CEO of your health, because there is so much information. That's not the challenge right now, but it's understanding what your body needs. And as we go through the decades of life, especially true for women, it's going to change at each point in the juncture.
Yeah. I think that the one thing, if you're going to be rigid about being flexible, because this is a journey. And you change by decade, and information is always changing. And we see it all the time where people become so married to a certain point of view or a certain modality that they're not able to kind of get out of their own way when that doesn't maybe serve them anymore.
So well put. Well, I think we are towards the end of our session, and I feel like, Jason, you're the one who usually closes us out, so maybe we could riff together and do a little closure. What do you think?
I think so. You're a pro. We're definitely going to do this again. What are you doing tomorrow? I have to do an interview. Plug it in. Like, sorry, surprise. Here's Sarah.
I'm available.
Thank you so much for this conversation. It's really meaningful to be able to have it with you. And we're so grateful for all the great work that you do in the world, and for being with us on this journey for so long.
Well, thank you for writing this book. This book is such an important contribution to changing conversations. I still believe, as you described, kind of social media versus books, I believe that books have the potential to change our culture for the better. And this is a book that does that. It is a game changer. It is profound. It is a beautiful book. It is a very clean mirror of the way that the two of you live your lives. And I'm just so grateful to be connected to the two of you. And I'm also wondering if you have a guest suite at your place in Miami.
Always.
Yeah.
Yes, you are always welcome for you. You are very kind. We're very proud of the book. I've said to Colleen numerous times, it's good, because sometimes you do content and pieces and you come back to it and you say, you know what, maybe we should have changed this, or I don't feel good about it. And every time I come back to this book, and I would tell you otherwise, like, I think it's good. I think it's really good. I think this is really going to change a lot of lives. I feel better and better as I've had more space from it, because that's not always the case. So I hope everyone feels the same. And you can go to thejoyofwellbeing.com to pick up your copy, or Amazon, or your favorite book retailer. We are so excited about it. And Sarah, again, thank you so much. You're an inspiration, and it's just a privilege to share the pod with you. And we're going to do it again.
Let's do it. Let's keep raising the oxytocin for our people.
Thank you.
Thank you.